Hello, everybody. I'm Storm Mushry, Conservation Education Manager for the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. And today I'm really excited about our presenter. The Gila National Forest has always been a special place in my heart. I love it down there. And anytime we go on camping trips as a family, or I potentially get to go on hunts, I always jump at the opportunity to go down to the Gila National Forest. And when I think of the Gila, when I'm thinking about fish, Gila trout come to mind. So our guest speaker today, be giving a presentation, is going to be Jill Wick, and she is going to be talking about a case study with Gila trout, but the talk will be dealing with restoration of fish species. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jill.
Thank you, Storm. So today I am going to talk about endangered species recovery. And I'm going to use Gila trout as kind of a case study for how do we attempt to recover a species that's listed on the endangered species list. So Gila trout are found here in the upper headwaters of the Gila River Basin, up here in the mountains of New Mexico. Most of the Gila River is in Arizona. It flows all the way from New Mexico down into the Colorado River Basin. Near Yuma. But the reason that the Gila is a really interesting and unique place is because it is the southern terminus of the Rocky Mountains and the northern terminus of the Sierra Madre. And then it's also at the junction of the Sonoran Desert and the Chihuahuan Desert. And so this has resulted in a place that is really kind of special. It has the highest biodiversity of anywhere in the continental United States. And it also has a lot of endemic species. So endemic species are species that are found in one place, but nowhere else on Earth. And so you might know some of these species, like the Gila monster that's up there, the Gila woodpecker, and then the narrow-headed garter snake there on the bottom. And then, of course, the Gila trout that we're talking about today is found in the Gila River Basin and nowhere else on Earth. And then on the bottom, there's the Chiricahua leopard frog. And so people knew that this was a really unique and special place for a long time. And the area that's shaded on the map here on the left is the Gila Wilderness Area. This wilderness area was the first designated wilderness area in the United States, and it was designated in 1924. And then the shaded area over here on the right is the Aldo Leopold Wilderness Area. And so between these two wilderness areas, almost all of the headwaters of the Gila River are within these wilderness areas. And so they have really been protected because of the protections that are provided by the Wilderness Act. So even in spite of that protection that is provided by the Wilderness Act, Gila trout has seen declines of their population over the last couple hundred years. And these are some of the causes for those declines. And I'm going to talk about each of those in a little bit more detail. So one of the first causes for decline of Gila trout populations was land management practices. So when Europeans settled the area, they changed the way the land was managed from before they were there. And there were things like overgrazing, changes in the way that timber was harvested that were not really sustainable or good for the ecosystem, and then practices like mining. And so those changes in land management resulted in things like decreased quality of the water, stream drying, and then changes in the wildfire regime. And those in result cause reduced habitat suitability and then fragmentation and isolation of populations. So this is where when we have, Gila trout in one location, but maybe the stream dries and so they can't interact with fish from another location. They're just isolated. Wildfire suppression has been another cause of decline. Wildfire suppression results in an altered wildfire regime. So as you suppress wildfires and don't let them burn as they naturally would, you kind of change the landscape, and that results in changing the type of wildfire. So wildfires become a lot hotter because there's more things to burn on the ground, and then they become bigger. And so those bigger and hotter wildfires result in floods that have a lot of debris in them and potentially toxic water in that flood water as well. And these can result in a complete loss of habitat. So if there's a lot of debris in the water, that can just completely wash out a stream so that there's no habitat left. And toxic floodwater can result in complete extirpation of a population. So extirpation is when that species is gone from one location. So it might exist in other locations, but in this stream, it's completely gone. And so just to as kind of an example of what that floodwater looks like, this is water samples that were collected from the Valles Caldera National Monument in northern New Mexico right after the Las Conchas fire in 2011. And on the left, it shows, what water in the stream normally looks like. And then on the right, it shows what water looked like immediately after the fire during those big floods. And so as you can see in the table there, just a huge increase in total suspended solids, conductivity, phosphorus, nitrogen, and then ammonia. And if you've ever had a fish tank, you know that ammonia levels are really important to fish, and keeping ammonia levels low is really important. And so that big spike of ammonia in the water can result in a complete fish kill. Fish can't handle very much ammonia at all. And so in a lot of streams where we see this big spike of ammonia, we find that fish are completely eliminated from the stream. So moving on to overharvest, which is another cause of decline for Gila trout. And this is kind of going way back before the Game and Fish Department existed, before there were fishing regulations and things like that. And people went out and were able to just collect as many fish as they want. They just caught as many as they could, took them home and ate them. And that unregulated angling and overharvest of fish, of course, resulted in reduction of the number of fish in a stream, and in some cases could result in extirpation. And then the problem with that is people still want to go fishing, and if they fished all the fish out of the stream, then there's no more angling opportunities. And then kind of the way to deal with that is to find another fish to put in that stream. And so once the effects of overharvesting were being found, then non-native trout were stocked in the stream to replace the Gila trout, the native trout that were there. And so stocking of non-native trout is problematic for a lot of reasons. And these weren't understood at the time when we were stocking these fish, but now they are understood. But non-native trout are, in New Mexico, those are rainbow trout, brown trout, and brook trout. And all of those species compete with the native trout. They will eat or predate on native trout. And then in the case of rainbow trout, they will hybridize with the Gila trout. So they interbreed with native trout. And then, of course, their offspring is not Gila trout. So we are losing the genetic information from Gila trout when we have a hybridization. And so this really is one of still the big threats to native trout restoration today. So this just is kind of showing how that population crash happened. So over on the y-axis is, just an estimate of the number of fish. And then on the x-axis down here is time. And so as we see over time, as grazing and timber harvest and mining, and then suppressing wildfires, and then overharvest on top of that, and then introducing non-native fish, basically we just kind of have a complete population crash. And that kind of got us to 1950, when Gila trout was actually recognized as a species. That was in 1950. And at that time, there were only 5 streams, very small streams, that still had Gila trout in them. So that's what this map shows. So all of the pink streams up there would have been historical habitat, or places where we would have expected Gila trout to be found. And then these red streams that are named are those 5 remaining streams where Gila trout still were found in 1950, when it was designated as a species. So a pretty reduced area that those fish are found. And I also do want to say that I'm just talking about New Mexico. This is just a map of New Mexico, but heel trout are found in Arizona as well. Most of the historical habitat and current habitat for heel trout is in New Mexico, but there are populations in Arizona as well. So soon after, or even before 1950, the Department of Game and Fish implemented some conservation actions for Gila trout. So there were two hatcheries that were established to try to raise native trout, to try to raise Gila trout. Jenks Cabin does not exist anymore, but Glenwood Fish Hatchery is still in operation today. In the 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps started building stream improvement structures like the one you can see on the bottom right there. And we still build these types of structures to create more fish habitat as well. And then in 1958, the department closed the first stream, Main Diamond Creek, to angling to protect Gila trout populations. And then at the same time, we implemented a kind of a policy of not stocking rainbow trout in streams where Gila trout were found as a way of protecting Gila trout. And to this day, we don't stock rainbow trout in any stream in the Gila Basin to prevent, them hybridizing with Gila trout. So, this history of conservation actions goes back pretty far, actually, and Gila trout was probably one of the first native species that, was being conserved as early as the 1920s. So that's kind of interesting and impressive to me. But in spite of all of those initial conservation actions, there still was only 5 Gila trout populations in existence at the time. And so Gila trout was listed as endangered under the precursor to the Endangered Species Act. So that was passed in 1966, the Federal Endangered Species Preservation Act. And then that designation as endangered continues under the Endangered Species Act. And then it was listed as endangered as well by the state of New Mexico in 1975. So from that time up until the early, through the 1990s, early 2000s, a lot of work was done by the Game and Fish agencies, by Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service to try to, get these fish in a better place and recover them. And because of all the work that was completed, they were downlisted to threatened by under the Endangered Species Act in 2006. At the time that they were downlisted, there were 13 populations of Gila trout and in 68 miles of stream. So now I'm going to just switch gears a little bit, I guess, and talk about kind of the recovery strategy. How do we approach recovery? What are our goals, and how do we do this? How do we attempt to get this fish off of the endangered species list? And so kind of the overarching main way that we do that is that we have a recovery plan and we have a recovery team. And so the recovery team consists of biologists from a variety of different agencies and universities that are knowledgeable about fish conservation and fish management. And they provide recommendations and they provide input on this recovery plan. And so the recovery plan really lays out exactly how we're going to get to recovery and what the criteria is for recovery. So what do we need to be able to delist or remove the fish from the endangered species list? And so there's kind of 3 main ways or approaches, I guess, to this strategy. The first one being that we want to protect any existing populations of Gila trout. So anywhere where we already have Gila trout, we want to make sure that they're going to stay on the landscape, that they're protected. And part of that is in the picture here, you can see a fish barrier that's on Little Creek in the Gila National Forest that protects the Gila trout population. So there's brown trout down below this fish barrier, and because of the barrier, they can't move upstream into the Gila trout populations. So our number 1 strategy is protecting those existing populations. The number 2 is basically to create new populations. So we're trying to reintroduce Gila trout into streams where they don't currently exist and replicate those existing populations. And so because of all those threats that I listed previously, normally we have to remove or mitigate those threats from a new place, and then we can reintroduce Gila trout. And so generally, for most streams, that means we have to remove all of the non-native trout. So we have to get rid of the rainbow trout, the brook trout, and the brown trout from the stream before we can introduce Gila trout into that stream. And then a big part of the overarching strategy is to have a captive propagation facility. And so this is Mora National Fish Hatchery up in Mora, New Mexico. And they solely produce Gila trout and provide fish for restocking for all of those new populations that we're creating. So as I said before, the recovery plan outlines what the criteria are to be able to remove the fish from the endangered species list. And there are a couple different criteria. Kind of the main one is that Gila trout have to occupy 174 miles of stream. So this is in both Arizona and New Mexico combined, 174 miles of stream. So there's quite a few challenges to doing this. There's a lot of challenges to doing this. And most of them, as for most species that are listed under the Endangered Species Act, relate to distribution and small populations. And so, you know, for this fish, there really isn't very many places we can go. We're very limited. They don't have a large distribution. They're only found in the Gila River Basin. That's the only place we can put them. The streams are small, so they have small populations. There's not very many populations. And because of the current, the way things are currently, a lot of those streams are isolated or fragmented. Specific to the Gila is that it's very remote. So the majority of the Gila trout streams are located within wilderness areas. So you can't use any mechanized equipment. You can't use ATVs or cars or trucks or anything to get there. So it's a challenge just to get to a lot of the locations where Gila trout are found. And we're normally either backpacking and hiking, or we are using pack stock to get to those locations to do our work. And then, you know, there are persistent threats. Probably the two biggest threats now for Gila trout are wildfires and non-native trout. Those are the two kind of biggest obstacles to recovery. So this is a table that just shows what recovery looked like, what progress looked like from 1950 when they were designated as a species up until 2012. And so, as you can see, there wasn't much progress up until the 1990s, and then from the 1990s through the 2000s, there was quite a bit of progress in establishing new populations. So the red is the number of populations, and then the blue is this number of miles that are occupied by Gila trout. So then in 2012 kind of turned out to be a really bad year for Gila trout. There was a big fire, the Whitewater Baldy Fire. It was the largest recorded wildfire in New Mexico's history. It burned almost 300,000 acres. It impacted 9 streams that were occupied by Gila trout, but it also impacted 8 potential recovery streams, so streams that contain non-native trout, but we might want to put Gila trout back into those streams. So this was a pretty big hit on Gila trout recovery in 2012. And then the following year, there was another fire, the Silver Fire, which was almost 140,000 acres, and this impacted 2 more streams occupied by Gila trout. So in the course of 2 years, we had 11 out of, I think, 16 populations in existence at the time that were impacted by these 2 fires. And so these fires, like I said earlier, they're very large fires, not what we would expect historically, and they burn extremely hot. So these are just a few pictures from immediately after the fire. The ground is just, completely burnt down to nothing. Streams are completely wiped out. So I don't think anybody, even if you don't know anything about trout, would think that this is a trout stream, but it is. But it's been completely just blown out by huge floods to the point where there's no fish habitat left whatsoever. Lots of dead standing wood, and just evidence of huge floods. So I don't know how tall this man is, but he's pointing out, where that flood level was in this creek. And it, looks up to like 7 feet maybe. So just to kind of get an idea of the impact of these fires, this is a map that you saw previously. All the pink streams are where Gila trout were found before the fire, at the time of the fire. And then this is the footprint for the Whitewater Baldy Fire. So as you can see, it almost hit like dead center on the majority of our Gila trout streams. And then the following year in 2013 was a silver fire, and that impacted 2 more streams. So, just a lot of fire impacting most of the streams in existence at the time. So as a result of those 2 fires, so in 2 years, we lost 8 populations and 47 miles of streams. So we got set back like almost 2 decades in the amount of work that we had done. It was a really big loss for Gila trout. So since then, it's been almost 9 years now since the Whitewater Baldy Fire, and we have done a lot of work in those 9 years. And so some of the things that we've been able to do were return fish to some of those streams where they did get wiped out. So, and a lot of those places, it doesn't take a whole lot of time for the habitat to recover. And so that's what we were able to, kind of wait until habitat recovered in some of those streams and then return Gila trout to those streams. And then we were also able to stock fish in 2 streams where before the fire, there was rainbow trout, but the post-fire flooding completely wiped out all of the non-native trout. And so we were able to put Gila trout back in those streams. So that was a little bit of a silver lining in the fire. One of those streams is Willow Creek, and this is just a picture of the creek where we built a fish barrier. So there's brown trout downstream of this, where the Gila trout are, brown trout and rainbow trout. And so we constructed this fish barrier to keep the brown trout and the rainbow trout from being able to move upstream into where the Gila trout are. So this is kind of a key part of recovery of native fish is, mitigating those threats and reducing, just limiting the ability of non-native fish to invade the areas where the native fish are. So we can have both. We can have native fish up above, and we can have our sport fish like brown trout and rainbow trout down below. And like I said earlier, a big part of recovery is captive rearing. Again, this is more National Fish Hatchery. These are just some pictures from the fish spawning that we do there. So this is a female Gila trout here, and they're expressing the eggs from her. They can just push them right out of the fish, and you can see in that Ziploc bag are the fish eggs. And so those get fertilized with milts from a male egg or a male trout, and then grow up into Gila trout that we then stock out into those creeks. So, like I said, one of the bigger things, and one of the things that we spend probably the most amount of time on for native fish conservation is restoration projects, or returning native fish to a historic location where they're not found anymore. And so after the Whitewater Baldy Fire, the map on the screen here, this is Whitewater Creek, which is it's in the Gila Wilderness near Glenwood, New Mexico. And after the fire, rainbow trout were only found in the locations on here where it's red. So there were only rainbow trout up here in the headwaters, and then down in this very lower reach. And the rest of the stream didn't really have any fish in it, or we didn't find any. Might be a few here or there, but for the most part, it was restricted to those upper headwaters and the bottom, down by the catwalk, if you're familiar with that area. And so this was an opportunity for us to be able to go in, remove these remaining rainbow trout, and be able to put Gila trout back into this stream. And so the way that we do that is that we use a chemical called rotenone. It's a chemical that is only toxic to fish. It only affects gill-breathing organisms. And it's toxic to fish at really low concentrations, and it's not toxic to wildlife or humans or anyone else at the concentrations that we use it at. So this is really the best tool that we have to make sure that we're removing all of the fish, all of the unwanted fish, all of those non-native fish. It is a restricted use pesticide. It can only be used by a certified applicator. And the really nice thing about it is that it degrades really rapidly outdoors. So when it encounters light or organic material, it degrades really rapidly. So this is what we use for most projects in removing unwanted the fish like rainbow trout and brown trout and brook trout. So that's what we did in Whitewater Creek. We started this project, I think, about 4 years ago. And as I said earlier, Whitewater is a pretty remote location. After the fire, there's really difficult access into this drainage because most of the trails were kind of ruined by the fire, by rainfall after the fire, and then with lots of dead trees. So we had to do a lot of trail clearing and, physical labor to get in to be able to get to the stream. And this is in wilderness, so we can't use chainsaws or any kind of mechanical equipment. We have to do everything by hand. We're using pack animals for the most part to get into the streams to get our gear and our camping equipment. And then for the actual application of the pesticide that we're using, we did get a special authorization to use helicopters to long line our gear into some locations where we weren't able to access with pack animals. So this is a pretty big project. I think in the first couple years, we had anywhere from 20 to 30 people working in the drainage at one time. So a pretty big operation to carry out in the wilderness area. Like I said, we're mostly riding horses and packing gear around. But we did do a fair amount of backpacking, especially to get into places where we couldn't access with pack animals because, like I said, trail conditions were very difficult. This is just a picture of one of our camps in that first year. And then the application of the actual chemical is done at 4-hour intervals. So we put it in at 4 hours as we're moving downstream. And we use these drip buckets to administer the chemical. It allows for a consistent rate of application. So we know exactly how much chemical we're putting into the stream. And then we also use a backpack sprayer application in little seeps and springs and areas that are not, kind of smaller and not able to, we can't put a drip bucket on. So that's how we apply the chemicals. And then hopefully it results in us killing the fish that we don't want there anymore. So we did this for 3 years. We had to do three applications of the chemical in order to get all of the fish removed. And last summer, so in August of 2020, we stocked the stream with Gila trout for the first time. And so it was a really exciting day to be able to put Gila trout back into these waters after we, so much effort to remove the rainbow trout. And so we stocked, these little baby Gila trout, and this is normally what we do. We'll stock for 3 years in a row, and those fish will grow up into adult fish and spawn and create a self-sustaining population in Whitewater Creek. So after all of that, after our project in Whitewater Creek and getting fish back into new streams and building fish barriers and putting them back where they were before, we are now have 23 populations of Gila trout out there in 124 kilometers or 124 miles of stream. And so as you can see, that's a pretty, I think, impressive increase in population from come back from where we were in 2013. And so we're making progress. Just to jog your memory, the criteria for recovery for delisting is for the fish to be in 174 miles of stream. So we still have a little ways to go, but we are definitely making progress. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about what it takes to recover an endangered species. And if you have any comments or questions, my email is up there on the screen.
Thank you, Jill. I loved your presentation, a lot of great information. And like I kind of said in the introduction, the Gila is a special place, and I know you love it down there as well. And I can't thank you all enough for the hard work that you've done bringing this species back. And it's one of those, I guess I've got two questions for you. One is because I messed up at the beginning of the recording. I've been putting people's titles by their names, and I did not do that for you because I think I was so excited about your talk today. So if you wouldn't mind just letting us know what your current position is within fisheries. And then my question would be, is there any life skills that maybe you weren't necessarily taught in, mid school, high school, or even college that you have found have really, really helped you with your position or positions that you've held with our agency? So.
Sure. So my current position with the department is as the Native Fish Program Manager. I have worked for the department for going on 13 years now, and I've held a few different positions. I started out as the aquatic habitat specialist. I was the Gila trout biologist for about 7 years. And then I held a job as a basin supervisor before I got the job that I have now. So I've moved around a little bit, but I do really love working for the department. So it's been good. As far as skills that I didn't learn in college or in school, well, probably as you can see from my presentation, a lot of outdoor skills are needed for this job. I spend a lot of time, or as a biologist, you spend a lot of time camping, hiking, backpacking, all of those things. So those aren't skills that I really learned in school, but they were skills that, things that I enjoy doing. And so, I've been doing my whole life, and I feel lucky to be able to do them for my job. And then we do, like in this job, I did and do a lot of horse packing. And so that was something that I had never done before I got this job, learning how to ride a horse, how to pack a horse, and things like that. But that was something that I learned when I got the job. And I spent, like I said, spent 7 years on this job. So I don't consider myself a cowgirl by any means, but I do know how to pack a horse, and I never thought I would learn that. But I think one of the biggest skills in this job that probably I didn't anticipate, and I think I did learn in school, but maybe that I never realized how important it is communication and building relationships. So especially for endangered species recovery, it's very collaborative. We work with a lot of different agencies and entities to do this work. For this project in particular, we're working with an endangered species. So the Fish and Wildlife Service is involved. We're working on national forest land. So the Forest Service is involved. We work with researchers from universities. We work with Arizona Game and Fish. And so the ability to build those relationships among people from those different agencies, to work together, even if maybe we don't have the same exact goals, and just the communication skills needed for doing all that, in addition to working with the public, because the public is always interested in what we're doing. This is a sport fish, so you can fish for this fish, so we're dealing with anglers. So all of those communication skills, I think, are really important. And when I was in college, I don't know that I really realized how important those skills are.
That's a great insight. And I think what's really interesting is that type of question that I have asked some of our presenters. It's amazing to me how much or how many of them are mentioning communication, anywhere from being a wildlife biologist, fisheries, on the law enforcement side. I think, a lot bigger than most of us realized as we were progressing through our school careers and getting ready to join the workforce. So, but with that, I want to thank you today, Jill. Again, great presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll catch you on the next recording.